This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, welcome to the Extra Point. I'm Cheryl Ross, the Next Steps and Discipleship Pastor here at Southwood Church, and I'm joined by Scott Beha, our lead pastor, and our special guest, Jacob Tucker. And we're in another week of our Rise and Fall series where we're going through the book of 1 Samuel. But before we get into that, I want to make sure that if you haven't liked or subscribed to this podcast, that you go ahead and do so. That way you don't miss out on any new content. So this past week, we were in chapter 9. And we were talking about really where we're introduced to the first king of Israel. But one of the things that you said within it, Pastor Scott, was that if you want God to use you in big things, then you have to be faithful in the small things. Yeah. But then later you talked about how it's not really about you, but who you're becoming and how it's the strength of your character that will sustain you in your calling. And I feel like these two things go hand in hand, because if you're not willing to do the small things, then, you're not going to be able to develop that character that will sustain you. And so, Pastor Scott, let's talk about that for a couple minutes, and maybe even Jake can come in on this a little bit and see how we've seen this in our own lives, how we see this play out practically for us.
Yeah. So let me tell you, the people that make me the most nervous that I've met in ministry are people that are overly eager to get up and take positions of leadership and be up front and center. Right out of the gate. Yeah. That is normally a sign of someone that has an unhealthy aspiration to be the one that's getting all the praise, rather than someone that has developed themselves behind the scenes. I think what has happened I mentioned in that sermon 2 high-profile pastors that were excused from ministry last week because of stuff. I think there are some pastors all around the country that they grew in obscurity, and so therefore they had time to develop their character to hold on to the platform that they were given. Yeah. And what happens a lot of times is some people, their growth is so rapid that they don't have time for their character to catch up, which is not a good thing. The church has to do something about that. Yeah. We cannot get ourselves into those situations where you get leaders that think that they are invincible and can do just absolutely anything and everything that they want and hurt people around them, and things like that. And so I think that there is a blessing in the obscurity of ministry, even though it's something that I personally struggle with, really, really hard. It's I'll have these conversations with God. Okay, God, if you want me to just live out my days in Charleston, West Virginia, preaching to 300, 400 people, and no one, even one county over, knows my name, okay, God, I know that that's a worthwhile calling, but that's still really, not necessarily the aspirations I had when I started. But I think the longer that you can develop your character in obscurity, the better chance you have of holding on to the position that God will ultimately end up giving you, and just being willing to be the person behind the scenes for a season. Because if you try to come right out of the gate and grab a microphone, it's going to make me very skeptical of you. Yeah, somebody shows up immediately and it's I want to preach, or I want to, this or that. I want to. It's hold on a second. Let's see if you have that, go and find the donkeys type of mentality first. Yeah. If you're not willing to just go grind it out. Before I was the lead pastor, I had a version of the job that you have now. Yeah. Except for, it was a little different where I was doing more graphic. I did calendars. And they were the worst calendars on the face of the earth. They weren't even designed. They were just okay, so I'm not a creative at all. So they are exactly how you would think a calendar would look if not a creative person made them. They had the date running down one side of the page and just a written description of what was happening. Yep. They were the worst calendars ever, but our pastor wanted them to go out every month so the way people knew what was going on. So I was making calendars. I'm the one that put that god-awful fence around the playground out there, which I still don't know why it's not chain link. It's terrible. That is for a cow pasture. It's terrible looking. I'm the one responsible for it, though. That's what they said they wanted, and they knew, hey, if there was something wrong with the building, it came to me. I found the people to fix it. I did mission work. I did groups. I did first impressions, which is like so funny because I'm not the most hospitable. But I went through a season. It was a season of 2 years. The 2 years of the most miserable ministry I ever did. But it was during that season that the elders of this church allowed me to start coming to elder meetings, so that way they could prepare me to have the position that I have now.
Yeah.
So there was a long time where I wasn't the person up on stage, and I wanted to be the person up on stage really, really bad because I knew I had a gifting to teach. But I think the wisdom was it just you might have the gift in a moment, but the time might not be right. And so that's what I've seen play out. So having time to develop your character and having a season where you kind of have to be the one to do a lot of the ministry behind the scenes is so good. Like, I don't know if you know Pastor Judah Smith at Church Home. He started out, that's his dad's church that he's now the pastor of. It's one of the biggest churches in America, and he's one of the most recognizable pastors. He started out as the janitor at that church. He was the janitor at that church. If you're not willing to, take whatever position you can get to get the ball rolling and be the guy that's just cleaning toilets or the girl that's wiping down cabinets or whatever it is, like Jared's story, be the guy that's changing batteries. Right? Whatever it is, if you're not willing to do that, then if you're not fit for a toilet brush, you are not fit for the pulpit, period. You're just not.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Jacob, you have started volunteering with youth, right? But your story is a little different getting there, right? I think I remember, gosh, it's been a couple years now, probably, when I remember Pastor Scott had met with you, and he said, man, that guy might know more of Scripture, more about the Bible than I do, because he's just constantly reading. Tell us a little bit about, your approach to getting to that place where you initially accepted Christ, and then getting to that place now where you're finally volunteering in a position here.
Okay, yeah, so I had a calling while I was working out of town. I was working on a boat on the river, and I just had a calling to read the Bible. I didn't even have a Bible. Straight off the phone app.
Yeah.
And I just felt a calling to read Genesis to Revelation. And I read it, honestly, way too fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't really Bible studying. It was more just reading. So as I started to, figure out who I truly was and realize just kind of how off the beaten path of where I needed to be, I started getting convicted. So initially some changes started happening, and I knew that I wasn't where I wanted to be, and I wasn't where God, where his will for my life was at. I just was not there. So as I'm reading the Bible, things are starting to happen in my head, and I'm like, one, I don't like working away from home anymore because I'm so in and out of the church.
Yeah, and he had small kids.
I had kids, and it's like, man, I'm just not living the life that I know God has planned for me. So I take the steps. I get a home job, and you actually messaged me about leading a group with Will, and I was like, okay, God, I hear you. So it's like, and then as I'm coming to church more because I'm home more, and it's like, man, I'm realizing that I'm not just supposed to show up here on Sunday and live the rest of the week secularly. So it's like God is he just has his hand on me at all times, and I'm starting to listen.
Yeah.
So it's like now I'm having I know I'm supposed to serve. So whenever I came to you about, I felt going to youth ministry was needed, and the reason I felt that was because the way I remember myself in middle school and high school, I'm like, man, I really needed someone. I needed some guidance, you know. So just being in the position of being able to, you know, volunteer here and just feel my life leading more down God's path for me and not my path for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of my favorite memories for you guys, like, too, was that as you guys were studying, coming to church, and doing all those things, like, because your wife, Aaliyah, interns here. She was on this podcast with me last week.
Right.
And, you know, talking with her and you guys about, you know, the fact that you knew you were supposed to get married. Like, you knew you were living in a way that you weren't supposed to be.
Yeah.
And we helped, you know, make that happen.
Absolutely.
But then it was like, once that was done, that opened the doors for you guys to do so much more. Really,
Yes.
I think that was one of those big steps initially to where, like, it's something that, like, Pastor Scott talked about some last week even. Like, if you're not being faithful in this area, you can't expect God to bless it later on. And so, like, you guys took the steps to do the things to then, you know, get in that place where you're right with God and right in your relationship to then be able to do these things. And so it's really cool to see. But that kind of, like, leads us to the other point about how it's the sovereignty of God and the responsibility of humans that come together to bring God's will to pass. Pastor Scott, share with us some about how that really plays out practically within our lives too.
Yeah, so I mean, you can use Jake and Aaliyah as a perfect example. They are here because of a ministry that Lori Meadows wanted to do at this, and I knew when she brought that to us that it was a perfect fit for our church. And so because she's being faithful, and then by the sovereignty of God ends up at this church, has the conversation with me. That's why Aaliyah ends up here because of Recovery Point, our ministry to them. But again, she could have, there's 100 girls there every week, and only about, I don't know, anywhere from 5 to 30 show up here. She could have not done that, but she took the initiative to start coming to church during that season.
Yeah, well, I even think she only came here for Beauty Day. I don't even
Oh,
think
is that
she
right?
actually
She only
didn't
came
start
for
attending
Beauty
here
Day?
until after she was out of Recovery Point.
Wow.
And I remember, because, like, Abel was real young. He was in the nursery. And it was like we had just opened up kids ministry for both services back there after COVID.
I wasn't even coming.
Yeah.
You weren't even coming.
He
So,
wasn't even coming.
so yeah, so it was just so it was Beauty Day.
Yeah.
So even that, so she's just here because I guess they had the option to stay home, but who's going to stay home if you have a chance to come to something like that?
Yeah.
Right.
So, but it's all it. If you look at it from a secular worldview, they'd go, wow, what a coincidence that this lady shows up at Southridge with this idea to minister to people. And next thing you know, like this, and let me just go through all the what the world would say, oh, that's coincidence. So it's not coincidence. There's a couple that still goes to church here. That she was the first person that I baptized from our recovery ministry. They come to church every Sunday. I married them. I did Jake and Aaliyah's wedding. Aaliyah now works for us here. She's going to have a seminary degree in 3 years and 3 years work experience to where maybe she'll work here, maybe she'll work somewhere else. I don't know.
Yeah.
We asked Jake to come onto this podcast because he's in a season right now where while his wife is doing this, he's taking care of his family. But I'm fairly certain he knows that there's a calling on his life as well. And so we'll even find there are certain times of life where you go, all right, I'm the tent maker like Paul was. Paul had to go and just earn a living while doing ministry. And then your season will come into another one. And so like we're sitting here with him. I just did a wedding last weekend of another person that came from that recovery ministry. And so from the outside, it's like, oh, what a coincidence. It's like it's not a coincidence. No. It was the sovereignty of God putting pieces together and then people walking into it. Because Jake and Aaliyah didn't have to say yes to all that God has said, has led them to. Josh and Caitlin didn't have to say yes to what God was leading them to. Tia and Jay didn't have to say yes to that. And on and on and on. Lori didn't have to say yes to what she was feeling being led to. Like,
Yeah.
she could have been like, "No, I got a full-time job, man. I got kids and grandkids. I don't need that in my life." But she was obedient, and then the sovereignty of God kicks in, and then all of a sudden, now you have all these stories that look like coincidence. Oh, how did all these people's paths cross? It's like, it's not like that, because in that story, you see Saul is going and he's just walking to find Samuel. At the same time, it's written in a way, and it's like, oh, him and Samuel just bump into each other. Oh, what a coincidence. No, it's not a coincidence whatsoever. It is the sovereignty of God while two people were walking out their individual assignments from God. That is that's how God brings to bear things in this world. I think I said it first service. I think I missed it second service. For whatever reason, this is how God has chose for the created order to be governed. Is God sovereign? Absolutely. But how does he get stuff done?
Through his people.
Through people. When this is what frustrates me when people don't understand the significance of Genesis 1 and 2.
Right.
When God makes humanity in his image and gives them dominion over the created order, what he is doing is saying, the way that I will bring to pass things in this world will be through this person, these people, this type of creation. That's what he's doing when he gave dominion. He's going, okay, there's now going to be a partnership. At the end of the day, yes, God is responsible. And if he wants to say no more free will, he can say no more free will. He's in charge. Right? That's why, remember that old Amy Grant song, God is in control? That's a terrible song. God's it's not control, he's in charge.
Yes.
There's a difference. If he was in control, he would be micromanaging the affairs of every single person. Like, oh, Jake thought that he chose to be here today. No, God just made you be. No, that's not what happened. Right. God, in his sovereignty, laid something on my heart and gave you a door to walk through.
Absolutely.
That's how you could say yes, you could say no.
Yeah.
That's how this. So he's in charge. So he has set up the way that the created order works. And yet, for some reason, he has chosen to bring his will to pass through humanity. Now, can he step in supernatural ways to bring his will to pass without humanity? Yes, he does it all the time. Right? This is like when a miracle happens, that's when God goes, sorry, Jake, I don't need you on this one. I'm gonna take it from here.
Right.
Yeah.
But then a lot of times, it'll be like, you know what? I'm going to use Jake this time. I'm going to use Aaliyah this time. I'm going to use Cheryl. I'm going to use Jared this time. Because he could do it all without us. Yeah. But for the most part, he chooses not to.
Yeah.
He chooses to use us. And so that's why it's not as like our Calvinist brothers and sisters. I still, that we don't agree on a lot of stuff. This is one of those things I don't agree with them. Because they think that everything is being micromanaged by God. That's what we disagree on that.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's perfectly fine if that's how you see the scriptures. That's not how I see the scriptures. It's a secondary issue for me. But we need to realize we have a role to play. This is why God created us, and God has a role to play in both of us. When we both do our part of it, is when you really start to see God's will come into pass.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really special because, you talked about how God has set something aside for you, prepared for you long before you showed up.
Yep.
But it's usually confirmed by others through the Spirit. And I think we all have our own individual stories. Like, I remember before I took the position as kids director here, going through and every single question that I had, every doubt I had, when it would come, I'd bring it to God, and he would use somebody to say, no, this is you. One of them was my good friend Jenny Lawrence, who's also a pastor now. She was somebody that I thought maybe wanted the position, and I thought, I went and saw her newborn baby that day, and I remember standing in the hospital, and it was right before I was coming here to meet with the elders, and thinking, she might want this job, And she asked me who was taking over for Pastor Jason, who left the position, and I said, well, actually, I'm going to meet with the elders right after I leave here. And I remember being so nervous, thinking, she's going to be so mad at me, so upset with me. And she was like, oh, yeah, it's you, girl. And I was like, what are you talking about? And she was like, don't you remember how I tried to get you to take other positions at the church? And I was like, no, I don't remember. She was like, I tried to get you last summer to take an internship at the church. And I was like, no, I don't remember that at all. I didn't even remember, but I said no to these other opportunities. But I still ended up where I was supposed to be. And I see it similarly to the interstate, it's the quickest way to a destination, right? But you have off ramps and you have back roads, and sometimes I think like we end up taking those, side
We do.
the long way around to get to those places at times.
We make things much more difficult than they have to be, and it's full because again, in the sovereignty of God, He's going to bring to pass what He wants to bring to pass.
Yeah.
You get to choose how difficult or smooth of a road that's going to be based on your cooperation with His will, right? And so that's divine sovereignty, human responsibility.
Yeah.
Always coming together. Because for me, I'm fairly certain from a young age I had a call in my life to preach. My parents actually have pictures of me, because my dad was a preacher up until I was 3 or 4 years old. My parents have pictures of me when I was little with a cardboard box. I was using it as a pulpit with a Bible on it. I was sitting there preaching sermons as like a 3-year-old. But I chose to take the stupid way. And it took 23 years to work out all the stupid and finally get to where God wanted me to be. So it's you can make the process a lot smoother if you will recognize it earlier and not fight against the sovereignty of God happening in your life. So there's always there's always a confirmation of other people as well. Like I was one of the people that Mark Sundstrom, when he was hired in that position, came to. He said, "Who's the next person to lead the children's ministry?" I said, "It's Cheryl," and I'd already told. Did you know that?
Nope.
Yeah, and there was probably 2 or 3 of us that were here at that time that said the same thing. So no, it's Cheryl. The person's already here. You don't have to go look for anybody else. We already knew.
What's really funny is that, like, and I don't even think Pastor Jason knew this, but I had never even actually taught a lesson to the kids before that first Sunday that I took over. Wow. I had done everything, like all the other stuff, but I never actually taught the kids. Yeah. I could, I've taught kids in other churches, but not here. Yeah. And so
Cheryl and Anthony served with me in youth ministry.
Yeah.
And so that was
and in kids ministry.
Yeah, and in kids ministry. Yeah, we have done this as volunteers and as staff for close to 14 years now. 13 years. Awesome. And it from the outside, it looks like coincidence, but when you start to realize it's not coincidence. Yeah. It's God's sovereignty and then our responsibility. Yeah. Always to get where God wants us to be. Because He'll give you a choice, and you get to choose whether you're going to cooperate. Because if you don't, He will find somebody else. And that's what we're going to find out. That's the crazy thing about the story about Saul is he looks like he's the right guy for a while. But he ends up not being the right guy.
Yeah. But, along the way, though, there are times, stepping into that calling isn't always easy. There's some people who have a lot to say, who doubt, who don't think that you're the right person, the right fit. Yes, there's confirmation by others, but I would venture to say there's just as many people who are naysayers to that, who don't think it's you. What can we learn from Saul? Because I don't think you got to this part of the passage. What can we learn from Saul about how to react, how to handle those situations?
I want to read this because I didn't get to read it because the sermon should have been 2 sermons, and I didn't break it up like I should have. I thought it's less than 4 pages, which is normally I'm good at 4 pages, but I also had 2 people sharing testimonies. Yeah, I knew better, so I didn't get to this. But right after Saul is king and he steps into it, it says this in verse 26 of chapter 10. When Saul returned to his home at Gibeah, a group of men whose hearts God had touched went with him. So when Saul stepped into his calling, there was a group of people that God touched their heart and was like, Saul, that's your people. That will happen for people. When you step into what it is that God is calling you, you will realize that there will be a group of people that will just gravitate towards you and will follow your leadership. And that feels awesome. And then the next verse says this. But there were some scoundrels, and yes, I'll call anyone who doesn't want to follow a scoundrel. I like that word. I'm just kidding. Just kidding. There were some scoundrels who complained, how can this man save us? And they scorned him and refused to bring him gifts. So there was also doubters immediately. In anything that you do, anytime that you step into the calling of God in your life, you will have people whose hearts will be with you, and there will be those whose hearts will be completely set against you, and you won't even necessarily understand it. But the last part of that verse, it says, but Saul ignored them. I love that. Like, how do you deal with haters biblically?
Ignore.
Saul said, just ignore them. Like, I'm king. Well, I'm on a mission that is too big to worry about some people that's got stuff to say about me. And I'll just be honest, as a leader, that's been really hard for me to get to that place. I'm getting there more and more. The more I grow into it, the more and more I'll go, yeah, like if that person doesn't want to follow what God's doing here, there's the door. Don't let it hit you where the good Lord splits you. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, I can't, because if you live and die by trying to appease everybody and try to make sure you don't lose anything, sometimes the best growth around here has happened through subtraction. Like, it's just like if somebody's got cancer, when it gets cut out, the whole body gets a lot healthier. And so sometimes you got to let the haters just walk. And that's okay, because if they are genuine in their pursuit of faith, they'll find a new place that works for them. They'll be a blessing to that church. Our church will be blessed because we got rid of somebody who's not on mission, not on vision with us. And so I love that this passage ends with, he steps into it, and there's some people that are like, yes, you're our guy. We'll follow you wherever you go. And then there are other people that would not walk across the road, to give him a cup of water if he was on fire. Like, and that's, it's funny, now that we're getting into this internship stuff, we're spending a lot of time with people that are just like brand new to the whole ministry side. And it's so funny because I took Will, our other intern, to breakfast one morning. And it was just during a couple of weeks where I was just getting a lot of negativity thrown my way. And he was just sitting there at First Watch, and he goes, I just can't believe anyone is ever mean to you. Like, I can't believe anyone ever says anything like that to you. How could someone say that to you? He was just blown away by it. And I thought that was I thought it was very sweet, because I was like, oh, buddy, just get ready, because they're going to do it to you. They're going to do it to you, because people don't like leadership requires some people will be happy, some people will not be. And if you can't lead like that, then you're not going to be able to lead in any organization, but especially the church.
I remember Pastor Mark telling me early on, like, you need to have a soft heart and thick skin. And I was like, ugh. Like, because I remember, like, that's hard. But I remember even stepping in, like, before I even accepted the position as kids director, I sent messages to people that I thought, whatever. I was like, hey, will you pray about this? And I remember even my husband's stepmom, like, they do not believe in women in ministry. And so, like, that's what I got back. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, whoa, oh, gosh. So I went to my husband, though, because I'm like, well, what do you believe? Because I was like, we've been talking about this for weeks. If he has a problem with this, then I can't believe he's not said anything. And he's like, oh, no, that's the way that they believe. I don't believe that way. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I remember just ignoring it. But it's a constant thing of, like, I mean, they still have to be in our life. Right? Like, they're my kids' grandparents. And so, there's constantly moments where they're like, are you going to, every time I had a kid, they're like, are you going to go back to work, or are you going to stay home? Because that's just how they believe. And so, like, you're stepping into that season too of, like, your wife is here working. You're going to be taking on an extra role with the kids. Like, how have you had any situations like that where maybe family, are some naysayers, or, like, how do you see yourself handling those?
I haven't directly had any, I guess you could say, like, conflict with that. But I know where I'm at today. I would be able to handle it very well. Because obviously I can see the calling in her life. I'm her husband. So it's like, I think it's amazing. And at first, just being honest, like you said, I've always kind of felt that calling in my life, especially since I've, been following Christ. And it's like, at first I was like, man, she kind of did what I wanted to do.
Right,
just
yeah.
no, just
100%.
Yeah,
being honest.
absolutely.
And as soon as I said that, I had a direct conversation with the Spirit, and he's like, "Listen, it's not your time."
Yep.
So now it's like I know what I'm supposed to do. And this is, I don't know if you want to call it a season, this portion of my life. I'm supposed to support her to the fullest.
Yeah.
Take on extra responsibility. Make sure that I am doing what I'm supposed to do. Because, listen, I could be like, oh, man, that's what I'm supposed to do. So now I'm going to be in this fit for the next 3 years, and I'm just going to be complacent in my faith. No. What I realize I need to do now is where God has me at work.
Yeah.
I need to be ministering to these people that I work with. Anywhere I go, I still need to, because God's still calling on my life.
Right.
Yeah.
And I just have to make sure that, I'm staying grounded. We really need to make sure that God is staying in the center of this whole situation, because we're going to be facing obstacles that we're not used to.
Right.
Like I'll be the only one working. So financially, times will be a little tough, but the struggle won't be forever.
Right.
So
Yeah. And I love. We're getting ready to get to the story of David here in just a couple of chapters, but David gets anointed as king of Israel long before he ever assumes the position.
Right.
And that's the thing. I'm going to take a leap of faith and say you won't be the only person that heard Sunday's sermon that wishes they were in Will and Aaliyah's spot.
Right.
It's just once people, because the internship thing that we did happened so fast last year, but I believed in it so much that we just found ways to make it happen.
Yeah.
Before we could even come publicly like this,
Yeah.
to do it. And so probably there will be a lot of people that yesterday was the first time that they even heard anything about this.
Yeah.
And they're going to go like, oh my gosh, I didn't know there was a pathway. Yes, there is a pathway, and Southridge is completely committed to figuring out how to raise people up. And the reason why, and this is why we like working with the Trellis organization, is because there is an absence of pastors all across the country in every single denomination, in every single type of position. This is why the last 2 times we had to hire people here at Southridge Church, it took over a year to 18 months in both positions that I had to hire. Because there's not just a bunch of people sitting out there waiting to come into ministry.
Yeah. Right.
That's what Trellis is doing, is it's raising up the next generation. And for us, I'm hoping that as we raise up some people, some of them will be good fits here. Some of them will be able to go and to populate other churches with ministers, because I don't want to wait 18 months for my next hire. I'd rather raise them up in here, because I also don't know, if they're already here, they already have our DNA in them, and already know our mission, vision, values, and things like that. And so bringing, like most churches nationwide, are raising people up from internally to fill positions. And so I see that shift happening. So that's one of the reasons why we have to do this here. But the other shift is, now, granted, this is crazy. I found this out last week. There's only one Church of God in West Virginia that is without a pastor.
Oh.
I thought that there was a bunch. There's only one Church of God without a pastor. Now, there's probably a bunch of associate roles in youth and kids and worship that are open.
Right.
But only one senior pastor role that is vacant in West Virginia for our denomination, the Church of God. But the need nationwide is unbelievable. Unbelievable. And so we have to help in whatever way that we can. And so if there are more people interested in the Trellis program, there are ways to figure out the money side of it. Like we only have one budgeted position for an intern. We have 2 right now, and that's because of the generosity of people that are giving above and beyond to help fund positions. And I am crazy enough to say this, even though I know all 12 of you that listen to this. Jake, get ready for the tens of people that listen to this to come flock to you like you're a celebrity.
Gotcha.
Afterwards. if there's somebody else in this congregation that is in a situation that could take this on, I feel fairly confident that we would find the funds one way or another, even in the midst of we are trying to pay debt off.
Mm-hmm.
I get that, but we are also not stopping what we think God is calling us to do as a church.
Right.
Period.
Yeah.
And so our goal is to take as many of these trellis interns, and then I would also love to see the teenagers in our church raised up and go to other churches as trellis students. I've been talking to one of our teenagers here every chance that I get to go, listen, why do you not, like, if you think that there's a chance that you're going into ministry, a church out there will pay for you to go to school, because the trellis program is so beautiful. You come out with 3 years experience plus a degree and zero debt, which is why most pastors are leaving ministry right now, because the financial constraints. Church giving is down because everyone's amount of discretionary income is down. And so, therefore, most pastors, I think, in the next 10 to 20 years are going to be bivocational anyways.
Yeah.
There's going to be very few churches, unless churches can figure out how to sustain themselves outside of congregational giving, they are not going to be able to continue to carry staff the way that they currently do. And most pastors are going to be bivocational, having to work a different job, kind of to make ends meet while they still do ministry. And so it's, I don't know, it's we're the church needs to raise up the next generation. And so coming out of school debt-free is going to be huge. Because nobody gets into ministry to get rich. So coming out with gigantic student loan debt the way that I have, to have the degrees that I hold is really, it was the path whenever I was coming up, but now it's not the path, so you don't have to do that anymore. You should go through the trellis program. It is, as far as I'm concerned, it's the best program out there. If you feel the slightest inkling towards ministry, it's the way to go. And I know it's hard because, like, for some people, they're not going to be able to, like Will and Aaliyah right now, they were both in positions where they don't have to worry financially because they have a spouse that can take care of that. But some people are going to have to go through the trellis program and work just like a regular college student in the evenings or whatever they have to do. That's fine also, because to sacrifice, there's a season of sacrifice, right? Like, so when I got called into ministry here at Southridge Church, I made 50% of the budget of the position that they hired me for. I have no idea why that was, and it was about a 50% pay cut from my regular job that I was making to come here. And so we are scratching pennies, like, to make it work for me to live out this calling. That's not where I'm at now. So it is a season, and if you have to work a full-time job in the evenings and do trellis and school and intern in the day, it is worth it to get where God will ultimately get you to go. And the need for pastors is so great, and this is a great place to get raised up. We have a great staff that kind of touches on every major ministry point. Like, everyone here is gifted in different ways, and so getting around a staff like this is going to be an absolute gift for the people that come to intern here. And I am very, very excited because raising up leaders is one of the things that God has asked me to do. In addition to getting this church out of debt, like, we have to raise up the next generation of pastors. And so I'm very excited. I'm very excited for the path that God has you and Aaliyah on.
Me too.
Right now, to try to stand beside y'all and support y'all to get you where it is that God has for you. But I'm very excited for the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited too. Hey, if you're kind of trying to figure out what your next step is, what that calling is, we would love to get together with you, have a conversation, sit down for coffee, lunch, whatever that looks like. That's how a lot of times it starts with one of these people who have started interning. Contact us, reach out. We would love to help you in that process. Maybe it's not to go into ministry. Maybe it's to start a nonprofit. Maybe it's something like that. But either way, we'd love to hear what God's calling you to, and spend some time in prayer over the next week. kind of trying to flesh it out and figure out what that calling is for you. But we'll be right back here again next time with another Extra Point podcast for you, where we're going to dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and give you some practical next steps for your faith journey.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.